Morning, everyone. I call this meeting to order and welcome to meeting 128 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Today's meeting, of course, is taking place in a hybrid format. We would like to remind participants of the following points. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. For members participating in person or via Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. The committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain the consolidated speaking order. So a reminder that all comments, of course, should be addressed through the chair. Pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, February 28th, 2024, the committee will commence clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-354, an act to amend the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunication Commission Act, which is better known as Quebec's Cultural Distinctiveness and French-speaking communities. I would like to provide members of the committee a few comments on how the committee will proceed with clause-by-clause consideration of this bill, C-354. As the name indicates, this is an explanation of all the clauses in the order in which they appear in the bill. I will call each clause successively, and each clause is subject to debate and a vote. If there are amendments to a clause in question, I will recognize the member proposing it who may explain it. Now, in addition to having to be properly drafted in a legal sense, amendments must also be procedurally inadmissible or admissible. The chair may be called upon to rule amendments inadmissible if they go against the principle of the bill or beyond the scope of the bill, both of which were adopted by the House of Commons when it agreed to the bill at second reading, or if they offended the financial of the Crown. Now, amendments have been given to a number on the top right corner to indicate which party submitted them. There is no need for a seconder to move the amendment, and once moved, you will need unanimous consent then to withdraw it. Now, during debate of the amendment, members are permitted to move sub-amendments. Approval from the mover of the amendment is not required. Sub-amendments must be provided in writing. Only one sub-amendment may be considered at a time, and that sub-amendment cannot be amended. When the sub-amendment is moved to an amendment, it is voted on first, as you know. Then another sub-amendment may be moved, or the committee may consider the main amendment and vote on that. So once every clause has been voted on, the committee will vote on the title and the bill itself, and in order to reprint the bill may be required if amendments are adopted, so that the House has a proper copy for use at report stage. The committee will have to order the chair to report the bill to the House. That report contains only the text of any adopted amendments as well as any indication of the deleted clauses. Finally, if members have any questions regarding the procedural admissibility of amendments, the legislative clerks to my right are here to assist the committee. However, as you know, they are not legal drafters. Should the members require assistance with drafting an amendment or a sub-amendment, they must contact the Legislative Council. I thank the members for their attention and wish everyone a productive clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-35. Yep. I would like to welcome two officials from the Department of Canadian Heritage who are available this morning to answer any technical questions related to the bill. We welcome Thomas Owen Ripley, the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Canadian Heritage, and Mathieu Laurent, the Acting Manager from Broadcasting. So before we get to Bill C-354, I see a hand up, and we'll go to Ms. Ashton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have a motion that I would like to present that you would have received notice about earlier this summer. As Canadians, we are all incredibly proud of the achievements of Canadian athletes during the Paris Olympics. 27 medals, including 9 gold, and memories to last a lifetime. We know of Summer McIntosh, who won 4 medals, including 3 gold, Ethan Katzberg, Cameron Rogers at the hammer toss, the many successes of our many team sports in the Olympics this year. We also know the heroic work of the brave women of our Canadian soccer team who fought and clawed their way up, but unfortunately came up short. No less heroic. But with all these fundamentally Canadian examples of hard work, of honor, of commitment to sport, there's also the fundamental un-Canadian actions that we saw from officials linked to our women's soccer team and Soccer Canada. While it shouldn't take away from the incredible accomplishments of our athletes, both our Canadian soccer players and the members of the Canadian Olympic team, we cannot deny that it was a massive distraction for them, particularly for the women of our soccer team, and certainly harmed Canada's reputation in the sporting world on the world stage. The use of drones to spy on other teams, followed by statements downplaying that activity, and even suggesting that everyone cheats, is unacceptable. We as parliamentarians have a responsibility to help get to the bottom of this, and more importantly, make sure it never happens again. Particularly as we set to co-host the 2026 World Cup, that is the largest world sporting event. That's why I'd like to table the following motion. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study of no less than 6 hours to study the role of officials associated to the Canadian women's soccer team and Canada Soccer in the use of drones for spying during the Paris Olympics or in previous competitions, which has damaged Canada's reputation and punished the players for something they had no part in, and that the committee summoned pursuant to Standing Order 1081, Bev Priestman, Jasmine Mander, Joseph Lombardi, and John Herdman to appear before committee for no less than 2 hours and before September 27, 2024, in addition to the Chief Executive Officer and representatives of Soccer Canada, representatives of FIFA, and past or present Team Canada soccer players, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to the report. I will note that some dates require some changing, and of course, as the mover of this motion, I'm unable to change them, but I would certainly welcome any amendments from colleagues to do so.
Thank you, Ms. Ashton. We'll go to debate. Mr. Koto.
Yeah, can I request that we take 5 minutes just to recess?
Can do that. Okay, we'll have a suspension then for 5 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. We'll move to Mr. Shampoo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. It's a motion that the Bloc considers to be important. We had discussions with Ms. Ashton about this motion and this potential study about what happened during the Olympic Games and, in general, what happens with Soccer Canada. But we are in the final stage of C354, which has been pushed to its extreme limits. We started studying it months ago, and my colleague from the NDP comes before us with a motion which we could have easily discussed and debated in our second hour. As much as we are in agreement and as much as we will have proposals to make it better, I think I would much rather go back to C354 and adjourn debate on this motion by Ms. Ashton.
You're looking to adjourn debate on this motion, so we would go to a vote then, if I could get Danielle to proceed with that.
And the motion is that the debate be adjourned. Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Yes.
Mr. Coteau.
Yes.
Mr. Chang.
Yes.
Madame Gainey.
Oui.
Madame Natanzio.
Oui.
Monsieur Gould. No. Mr. Giovanni.
No.
Mr. Soroka.
No.
Mr. Shampoo.
Oui.
Ms. Ashton.
No.
That's 6 yeas, 4 nays.
Seeing that, then we will move on. We will not deal with the notice of motion at this time from Ms. Ashton. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll move on. What we started to do at 11:07, which is pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, February 28th, 2024, Bill C-354, an act to amend the Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission Act, Quebec's cultural distinctiveness and French-speaking communities. Now, we will call for Clause 1. Clause 1 is CPC 1, and we'll ask if a member would like to move it. Mr. Giovanni, thank you. And so we'll start a speaking order. Mr. Giovanni, I guess, lead us off if you don't mind.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, Bill C-354 makes changes to the CRTC Act, which is a massive piece of legislation that addresses telecommunications, broadcasting, and effectively governs parts of Canada's cultural communities. The Department of Heritage mandate does as well, and I have a few questions that Canadians are looking for answers on for Mr. Ripley and Mr. Lorraine, our witnesses today. First question is, do you agree with the CBC paying $18 million out in bonuses this past year?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
A point of order? Who was the
Mr. Chair,
Noor Mohammed? Mr. Noor Mohammed, go ahead.
just the scope of the inquiries in respect of this particular piece of legislation in respect of the CRTC. CRTC does not have jurisdiction in regards of the bonuses of Crown corporations.
Ms. Gainey, is your hand up also on this? No? Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Giovanni. Duly noted.
Okay, so I guess don't want to answer that? Or
Chair,
Go ahead, Mr. Ripley or Mr. Lorraine.
thank you. Thank you for the question. Chair, I would humbly submit that our role as officials here today is to support the committee in clause-by-clause review of Bill C-354 and support you with technical questions on that piece of legislation or the CRTC Act. And I would be happy to do that, but I'm not able to express an opinion on the question put by the member.
Go ahead, Mr. Giovanni.
Okay, well, let's talk about something you is not an opinion, just a factual question. Did you have any discussions or briefings with the minister concerning signing off on a bonus for Catherine Tate?
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair. Chair, with all due respect, I do understand that this is a pet peeve issue for the Conservatives, but we only have one clause in this bill, and we are looking at an amendment brought forward by the Conservatives. So it would be great if my colleague could focus on the task before us, which is Bill C-354, and in that there is no reference whatsoever to the bonuses paid to whoever. It's about consulting with the government of Quebec, that it be automatic when it impacts communications and culture that deal with French in Quebec and everywhere else in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Shampoo. Mr. Giovanni, go ahead.
Would you like to answer that? Because I know you didn't want to answer the other
Rappel au
one because it was
règlement,
about
Monsieur le
opinion.
Président.
So,
Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. My point of order, the previous one was intended to bring my colleague's attention back to the bill that's before us, Bill C-354.
Okay, Mr. Giovanni, go ahead.
thank you. Well, given that Bill C-354 makes changes to CRTC, it affects a lot of people all across our wonderful country, I do think it's fair to ask some questions. So, did you deliberate with the minister in any way concerning a bonus for Catherine Tate?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, point of order, Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Noor Mohammed.
I'd like to go back to the point of order previously raised by Mr. Shampoo. We have ample opportunity to discuss CBC bonuses. We're going to be calling Madame Tate to come. She'll be there to discuss this. This conversation today is clause by clause on Bill C-354, as Mr. Shampoo has rightly noted, deals with something entirely different and has requested that you as the chair ensure that members are asking questions that are within scope of today's meeting, which is specifically to discuss the one clause inside Bill C-354.
Thank you, Mr. Noor Mohammed. Duly noted. Keeping into the scope, if you don't mind, Mr. Giovanni of C-354. Your questioning,
well,
please.
I believe we're asking some very relevant questions that Canadians would like answers to, but we can move on to another topic. Mr. Ripley and Mr. Lorraine, are you familiar with a recent report from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation that $2.7 million have been spent on film festivals by this current government?
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Shampoo?
Monsieur le Président, c'est un comité.
Mr. Chair, this is not a circus, it's a committee. Can we please remind members to concentrate on today's affair, which is the clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-354, which is expressly requested by the government of Quebec, and we shouldn't be wasting any more time and dealing with topics that have nothing to do with the task that's before us. And it's not complicated. There is only one clause, so if we can please come back to the issue at hand. It's been 15 minutes and we're just wasting time, so I would just like you to remind colleagues that we should be sticking to the task at hand.
Mr. Shampoo, yes. Mr. Giovanni,
Mr. Shampoo expressed his concern over time. I mean, if we just got answers to the questions, we'd be moving along really smoothly, I think. So, for Mr. Ripley and Mr. Lorraine, did you or any other heritage officials attend any of these very expensive film festivals?
Point of order, Mr.
Point
Chair.
of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead. I think it's Mr. Noor Mohammed this time, I believe. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, it's become clear that there are those that would like to turn this into a circus, as Mr. Shampoo rightly noted, and a clip machine. And I think it would be wonderful if Conservative members, instead of trying to turn this into a clip factory, could actually focus on the substance of the legislation that is before us. A lot of work went into it by past members of the Conservative in debate when we were discussing this bill by past members of this committee. Mr. Shampoo has spoken about the importance of having this conversation. All of us would like to get this bill done. It's one clause, for goodness sakes. There's going to be ample opportunity to ask officials all kinds of questions about different things, but I think we all have the capacity to stay on point and on subject of a one-clause piece of legislation. And it would be wonderful, Mr. Chair, if you could really ask this committee and all of us to focus our questions on the specifics of this legislation. And if not, we can all do exactly what Mr. Giovanni is doing and ask questions that are totally irrelevant and waste a bunch of time. But I mean, we're all here to try and get this bill dealt with. So maybe we could just focus on that.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Giovanni, please.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Cotto.
Yeah, I think, your job is to make sure that we follow the agenda and we stay within scope of the agenda. If I started asking officials about, different animals at the zoo, would you let that happen?
No.
So then stick to the agenda, keep in focus, and stay within the scope. We will have a lot of those questions are important questions. I'd love to hear some of the answers to some of those questions. We will have time. We will be focusing on CBC, but let's just get through this piece of proposed legislation. It's been on the books now for such a long time. Yep. We went through the same thing with Safe Sport. We've been doing this nonstop for years now, for a few years, really going off in different directions. I would ask you as chair to keep us in scope and focus.
Thank you. Mr. Giovanni, you've heard several people around the table here this morning. Please, your questions for C354, as we're dealing with, in fact, we're dealing with the conservative clause right now, CPC 1, and I've asked, you've moved it. Could you please stick to 354?
Well, I would say that the CRTC Act is a very broad piece of legislation. Bill C-354 is intending to make changes to a very broad piece of legislation. I believe all these questions have been relevant and within the scope of the conversation we're having about telecommunications, broadcasting, and legislation that governs parts of Canada's cultural communities. I appreciate that some of my colleagues have concerns over time, but I would just emphasize once again, if we just got answers to the questions, we would be moving along. I would say if you're concerned about time, let's get some answers on the table. So I also would like to also point out that at a time where we have a cost of living crisis, questions about the money being spent by the department to officials of the department seems very relevant to me.
Point of order,
and
Mr. Chair.
I think these are worthwhile questions to ask.
Chair.
Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Mr. Chair, none of what Mr. Giovanni is talking about right now is within the scope of C-354 and the specific clause that we are supposed to be discussing. All of the points that Mr. Giovanni has raised can be entertained during a variety of other meetings, when the minister comes for supplements, when we have the chair of the CBC. He is more than able to put forward motions, as many of his colleagues already have. This is a meeting that is supposed to deal with C-354. Just because Mr. Giovanni says, well, we could move more quickly if the officials ask questions, it's not actually how our process works. Parliamentary process doesn't work that way. We have officials there that are there to answer questions in respect of C-354. That is the agenda, Mr. Chair. That's in your hands. And it's up to you to decide whether or not we're going to have a meeting that deals with C-354 or whether we're all going to just ask whatever questions we feel like. Because I sure would have a whole lot of questions I'd like to ask about other matters and like RT, which I don't think are appropriate for this conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Noor Mohammed. I will say this, the Bill C-354 is really broad. Many Canadians have questions, I will say that. The consultation, along with the accountability, are some questions that even when I asked questions, I have concerns about. So those were two things when I looked at the bill, when I got told I would be chairing this meeting here this morning. So that's all I'm going to share. The consultation process, along with accountability, good governance on this bill. I don't know if we have talked about the good governance needed on this bill, C-354. So there are issues with this. It's a broad bill, coast to coast. It's just not Quebec. This deals with other provinces as well. So, Mr. Giovanni, I think you've heard the concerns. Please stick, if you can, to 354.
Yeah, well, let's stick with the theme of good governance. So we learned about a decision very concerning that the Department of Heritage through the Canada Media Fund supported a documentary called Russia at War that has been wildly condemned as Russian propaganda. Are you aware?
Mr. Chair, point of order. Point of order, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, when an MP is reminded via many points of order, as has been the case, I think it's the chair's role to take the floor away from them, because I think we have reacted sufficiently and you have heard the concerns of members of the committee. And with C354, we are looking at something else. You've qualified it as being very vast, but I don't think it is the case. It impacts Francophone culture, the French language, and the Francophone media outlets. It's not comprehensive. It's actually quite narrow and focused, and it's really easy to take care of. And you have heard so many points of order around the table, Mr. Chair. I think it is time that you cracked down and took the floor away from him.
Mr. Shampoo, okay. Last shot for you, Mr. Giovanni, if you can.
Well, it's pretty clear that some of our colleagues don't want to give our officials a chance to respond themselves to any of these issues that many Canadians are concerned about. We have a broad piece of legislation in front of us that's being amended by this bill, and I think all of these issues are relevant to the purpose of the department and could be uniquely answered by the officials that we have in front of us. So I would just like to give them a chance to respond, and I'll pause on asking additional questions. Thank you.
Mr. Ripley or Mr. Loren, any comments to make?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, MP Giovanni, for the questions. Bill C354 amends the CRTC Act, as the Chair set out in the beginning. That's the piece of legislation that creates and sets out the powers and structure of the CRTC. Mr. Chair, as you know, when officials are invited to clause by clause, we fulfill a particular purpose in terms of supporting the members in considering that legislation and answering technical questions they may have about the bill or potential amendments to the bill. And so while I certainly respect Mr. Giovanni's desire to get answers to these questions, it is outside the scope of why we are here today. And department officials would be pleased to pick up those questions in a more suitable forum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ripley. We'll move on. So what we're dealing with now is Ms. Gainey, or did you have any comments to make? Your hand is still up. I've got you on here, but Mr. Shampoo, Mr. Noor Mohammed, then you are as the speaking list right now. So thank you. Perfect. So we're dealing with Ms. Thomas that Bill C-354 in Clause 1 be amended by replacing line 8 on page 1 with the following: that the Commission shall hold public consultations with the government, and B, by adding after line 15 on page 1 the following: 102, that the Commission shall publish on its website a report on the results of the consultations held under subsection 101, and then 103, before participating in the consultations under subsection 101, the government of Quebec and the governments of other provinces shall consult with audiences in the French language markets in their respective provinces. So we're dealing with CPC number 1. Mr. Giovanni, you still have the floor, so I would like you to comment on the first. And we have a short, as duly noted here, CPC 1. So if you could deal with CPC 1, please.
Well, CPC Amendment 1 is a very logical addition to the legislation by requiring some communication with the public. We are talking about consultation with audiences in French language markets, not just in Quebec, but all across the country. And if this legislation is meant to serve those communities, then consultation with those communities seems entirely logical to me.
Thank you. Mr. Shampoo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'accueille.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I welcome the proposed amendment from the Conservative Party relatively favorably, and I would like to underline that they've made a lot of noise, if I can put it this way, when the government of Quebec issued a letter when C-11 was about to be adopted at the Senate. There were recommendations in that letter by the government of Quebec, which were important and which should have arrived earlier in the process. Nevertheless, the Conservatives acted as the spokespeople in a very loud manner. And one recommendation from that letter that we wanted to include in the bill would have had the effect of what's before us. So it's interesting to see that there is a spirit of collaboration to improve this clause. Now, even though I agree with the proposed amendment from the Conservative Party, but the first line, I would like to introduce a sub-amendment to it by getting rid of the first line and reading, the Commission shall hold public consultations with the Government of Quebec. I would propose that we strike that and come back to the original wording. The Commission shall hold public consultations with the Government of Quebec on the cultural specificity, etc., etc. So striking the first line to go back to the original wording, which was the Commission shall consult directly, because public consultations, when you put it that way, it's a long process, and we are looking for something that's more efficient here. Consulting with the Government of Quebec, it's relatively simple. So that will be between the CRTC and the Government of Quebec. So that's my sub-amendment proposal to go back to the original wording from the first version.
Thank you. Any discussion on this sub-amendment? Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the sub-amendment, look, first, I think what you're hearing is important, that whether it's the amendment or the sub-amendment, the importance of having good consultations. We've got Mr. Ripley there. So one of the things that I might ask is, and given that we are quite a bit of time removed from when we first had these conversations and we had witnesses on this bill, Mr. Ripley, can you just remind everybody, or can you just walk everybody through what is actually required of the CRTC when they are doing the work that they do? I mean, are they not already doing consultation at scale in the field when it comes to ensuring that stakeholders are listened to?
Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you for the question. So the way that the Broadcasting Act is currently structured, as some members of the table will know well, is that the policy objectives are set out at the beginning of the legislation, and then the CRTC has the responsibility to give effect and put into operation those policy objectives through its decisions, its regulatory decisions. The CRTC, when it does, when it seeks to make a decision, it typically does a public process, and those public processes are open, including to provincial governments to participate and make their views known. And so the CRTC it's already incumbent on the CRTC to generate a public record. And again, those processes are open to all stakeholders and all governments to participate in them and put their views on the public record. And then it's incumbent on the CRTC to make its decision based on the public record before it.
So in that context, then, sorry, Mr. Chair, can I keep going, or am I done?
You've got the floor.
Thank you. In that context, right now, how much consultation / input, I guess, or representations do we see? How often do you see representations from the province of Quebec to the CRTC on these matters? Because I would assume that the need for this legislation, or the need for this bill, or the amendment or the sub-amendment, would arise as a result of the fact that Quebec does not have an opportunity, or does not, people may not know that Quebec has the opportunity to already engage in and participate in these consultations. Can you give us some color as to how often the CRTC sees representations from the government of Quebec on behalf of French language speakers in that province?
Mr. Chair, if I may, so thank you for the question. What I can say is that we do see provincial governments participating in CRTC processes from time to time. So that is something that we have seen, and again, it is precisely because sometimes a decision that the CRTC is making can impact a provincial agency or something like that. MP Champoux mentioned the coming into force of Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act, And one step that we took at the department was supporting the minister at the time to send a letter to all of his provincial counterparts, including in Quebec, inviting them to participate in both the consultation on the policy direction as well as, the consultations that the CRTC would then subsequently launch on the Online Streaming Act. So the desire was to make sure that those consultations were on the radar of provincial counterparts and territorial counterparts, and make it known that indeed there's an opportunity for those provincial or territorial governments to participate in those proceedings should they wish.
Anything else, Mr. Noor Mohammed?
Just one more, if I could. So what I'm hearing is that there is already an expectation and a requirement for the CRTC to conduct and to consult. Under C11, that was sort of further encouraged. Is there any reason that you can see, or any impediment that you can see to consultations taking place, or for the province of Quebec to be engaged in consultations under the current regime? That is to say, with the CRTC Act the way that it is. Is there anything in there that would somehow preclude or prevent the province of Quebec or any other province in providing feedback to the CRTC?
Chair, no, there is no impediment to Quebec or any other province or territory from participating in CRTC processes. The way it works is the CRTC will usually put up a notice of consultation, which is basically, sets out the questions on which it's consulting, and then again, it's open to any interested stakeholder or any territorial or provincial government that wishes to participate to participate, and they are more than welcome to do so.
That's
Thank
good
you.
for me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. We'll go to Ms. Latanzio and then Mr. Coteau. Go ahead, Ms. Latanzio.
Thank you. I wanted to ask before for a copy of the amendment, the sub-amendment be sent by the clerk to our emails. I didn't want to interrupt my colleague. I'm sorry, I keep hearing a haggle. I don't know if there's sound issues.
Après le règlement.
Mr. Shampoo?
Il y a deux choses. D'abord, Monsieur le Président.
Okay, two things, Mr. Chair. We can see that Ms. Latanzio has maybe two ongoing connections at the same time. And secondly, it's completely legitimate to ask for a copy of the sub-amendment, but the sub-amendment is actually replacing the first sentence with the original wording in the bill. So it's very simple. But if Ms. Latanzio wants to have the sub-amendment proposal in writing, that is her right, and we will do that.
We could do that then. Do we need to suspend for that? Or you'll pick it up from him? Mr. Shampoo, your sub-amendment in writing, please. So, Ms. Latanzio, what's happened here video-wise? We see you, and then we also have another block where you're not seen, but the hand is up. So it's a technical issue that we're having with the House of Commons, and I think that's what Mr. Shampoo is referring to. If I could take a screenshot, I would have shown you what we're talking about, but I can see you, but also there is black with your hand up, so that's why I acknowledged you. But there is a technical issue. We really don't want to take you out because we're not sure you can come back in. And so that's why we're dealing with on this situation here. So
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that. Where we all can see what's going on. We're going to get it sent by email to everyone, probably P9s, I would suggest. So the sub-amendment by Mr. Coteau, or Shampoo rather, would be coming to your P9s. And a very good comment that you made, Ms. Latanzio, but it should be coming very soon. Do you have any comments to make, or is that all you had to say, Ms. Latanzio, on this sub-amendment?
Because I'm having difficulty hearing, and I apologize to Mr. Shampoo. That's the reason why I'm requesting it, and therefore am not in a position to ask a question if I don't have it in front of me.
fair. So I haven't seen it yet. I'm on my P9, and it's coming very shortly.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. If I might.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Norma. We might even
maybe
suspend
let's-
here for a second if you don't mind. But go ahead with your question to me.
And I was just going to say, maybe less of a point of order, but if the clerk can mute one of the two Miss Latanzios, it should work from an audio standpoint.
Okay. I think we're going to suspend till we get the sub-amendment sent to us. So we'll just suspend for a minute or two till it comes into our P9s, if you don't mind.
And we'll also try and
Been sent out on your P9s. And so if you can take a quick look at that. I have a speaking list to deal with this still. And I've got Mr. Noor Mohammed up first, and then Ms. Gainey, and then Mr. Coteau, I believe. So we're back. For everybody around the table and online, we're going to deal with C-354 for as long as it takes us. We're here for at least 1 o'clock. I know that we were going to have a closed session, but we are going to try to get Bill C-354 completed here today. So make the adjustments to your schedule. And Mr. Noor Mohammed, I don't see you, but you were up next. And I don't know if you got bumped out or you just went away for a second, but we're back and we're dealing with the sub-amendment of the block. Ms. Gainey, if you're there, we'll move to you if you don't mind.
How about Mr. Koto?
Well, I've got, yes. So, as we say in studio, Mr. Koto.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the officials for joining us today. I can remember back in 2016, there was a change of the CRTC, some proposals on taxing Netflix, if you remember. It was 2014, actually. If you can remember that. And I remember that the government of Ontario sent officials, and we actually we put forward a presentation. We weighed in on those changes or that proposal in 2014, and it was, it was the way the province of Ontario interacted with the federal government. Is that process still in place where, ministers provincially or through the territories or department officials can come and actually weigh in on those? Is that how can you explain how the consultation works, Mr. Ripley?
Chair, thank you, MP Koto. So indeed, the question that you're referring to was a CRTC proceeding at the time, and again, in those situations, it is open to the province or territory to either file a written brief with the CRTC, or if they are doing in-person hearings, to request to appear before the commission. So there's nothing that prevents a province or territory from participating in any CRTC proceeding and putting it on the record, the official position of that province or territory.
I know that there's mechanisms, the federal, provincial, territorial meetings, but are there other mechanisms where information flows freely between the federal government and provinces and territories so that they're not caught off guard or up to date in general on those specific changes or proposals?
Chair. So indeed, there are regular mechanisms that we exchange information or consult with our provincial and territorial counterparts. You mentioned the main mechanism, which is the ministerial table on culture, and there's also a deputy minister's table on culture. And so those are ways that at the department side we can keep our provincial and territorial counterparts informed, and vice versa. I think what's important to understand about the Broadcasting Act is that it is structured in a way to preserve and assure the independence of the CRTC, because at the end of the day, the role of the CRTC is to regulate the media sector, and it's important that they do so in a way that ensures that the decisions they make are seen to be independent and free from potential political influence. And so that's why the mechanisms by which any government, can engage with the CRTC is very formal. As I mentioned, it's open to provinces and territories to participate in any CRTC proceeding through the consultation process that the CRTC would lead. And for the federal government's powers to engage with the CRTC are actually very limited, and there's specific powers in the Broadcasting Act and a process to follow in those cases so that it's done openly and transparently. And again, that's in order to preserve the independence of the CRTC and ensure that decisions that could potentially affect the media sector are kept arm's length from government.
Well, from your perspective, Mr. Ripley, why is that that independence such an important component of the structure of the CRTC in general?
Chair, so it's recognizes that in a free and democratic society like Canada, we want to ensure the independence of the media, ensure that they have their journalistic independence. And so in a situation where you have a you have a regulator that needs to oversee the licensing and conditions of service that are placed on those media. To the extent that a government wants to weigh in on those, it's important that that be done in a way that respects their independence to ultimately make the final decision, and also provide transparency to Canadians, so Canadians understand again how a particular government, whether it's the federal government or a provincial territorial government, is engaging with the CRTC. And so that's why in this case they're all very formalized processes to ensure that there's not a perception of politicization of the CRTC.
Last question, Mr. Chair. Can you just go over maybe the last or second last process that that was used to consult provinces and territories? Like, given it as an example of when that took place, and if you can recall how many provinces and territories actually participated in the process, just so we can have an understanding of how effective the current process is.
Chair, if I may. So it's the example I gave to one of your colleagues earlier, that when the Online Streaming Act received royal assent, and there's a lot of changes currently underway in the space of broadcasting regulatory policy, the government and the minister at the time wanted to make sure that provincial and territorial counterparts knew of those changes and the opportunity to engage with the federal government in terms of crafting that policy direction that was ultimately issued to the CRTC on kind of orientation for implementing the Online Streaming Act, and also to make sure it was known that they could participate in the then subsequent CRTC processes. So that's the most recent example, and the department worked with the minister to be very proactive to make sure that those things were on the radar of our provincial and territorial counterparts, so that if they wanted to participate, they could. I don't know offhand, unfortunately, the extent to which provinces and territories have opted to formally submit as part of the implementation. I know that I believe there were a few briefs from provinces and territories put forward to date as part of the implementation of the Online Streaming Act. Obviously, that's a decision that ultimately rests with them and whether they choose to participate or not.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Go to Mr. Noor Mohammed. I think you had your hand up. We're going back. Yes? No?
I think Ms. Gainey was before me, but...
Yeah, well, I had you first, then Ms. Gainey. But go ahead. Okay, Ms. Gainey? I have on the list Mr. Noor Mohammed, Ms. Gainey, Mr. Godin, and Mr. Shampoo. Those are the four that I have. You were up first, Mr. Noor Mohammed. You're okay?
No, I'm good.
Okay,
I'm good.
Ms. Gainey.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious to know, in light of what we've heard about the consultation processes that already take place and have taken place, is there some redundancy in this legislation from the point of view of our witnesses today?
Chair, thank you for the question, MP Gainey. So as I mentioned, already open for provinces and territories, including Quebec, to participate in CRTC proceedings. The way that Bill C-354 is structured makes an amendment to the CRTC Act, which, as I mentioned, is actually the act that creates the CRTC and sets out its power. So it's not in the Broadcasting Act. And what Bill C-354 proposes to do is actually require the CRTC, and there's a reading of the bill that would require the CRTC, before it exercises any power under the Broadcasting Act or does anything under the Broadcasting Act, to consult with the government of Quebec or other provinces as it relates to the French-speaking communities in those provinces. And so it elevates that kind of duty of consultation with the province of Quebec or other provinces above kind of the current structure. And the concern is you are elevating these governments and putting them in a privileged position, and the concern would be that that could give rise to a perception of influence on the CRTC, again, because before they exercise any of their other powers, they have to go and do this consultation with Quebec or other provinces. So it's not just a question of redundancy. From the department's perspective, it introduces a risk because you are, again, elevating these provinces above other stakeholders who may want to participate and put their perspectives on the record.
Okay, so just to follow on that thought, then, does the government of Canada would have that privilege or that expectation as well to be consulted prior to an engagement, or we're talking simply that the provinces would acquire this right or this opportunity?
Chair, thank you for the follow-up question, MP Gainey. So no, there's nothing in Bill C-354 that would require consultation with the federal government, and in fact, there's no obligation on the CRTC to consult with the federal government before it takes any decision. So again, this is something new. It would not extend to the federal government. And the position of the department is it would be inappropriate for the CRTC to have to consult with the federal government before it made a decision, because obviously that then encroaches on its independence as a media regulator. And in a democratic society where we believe that the media should be at arm's length from the government of the day, that would be a concern.
Right. So if I may just continue, then that would make sense for an independent tribunal to have that independence, and really for that to extend and to stay the way it is would be most consistent with the mandate and the tasks of the CRTC. So there isn't a void or a need that we're addressing here with this piece of legislation. It creates more of an inconsistency, I guess, is what I'm trying to understand.
Chair, if I may, it creates a new category, a new obligation for the CRTC to do this specific consultation, again, with Quebec and other provinces, in a context where indeed there is nothing preventing those provinces from making their views known and putting them before the CRTC, and so it would put this added burden on the CRTC, but as I mentioned to you in my previous answer, from the department's perspective, also create a risk of potential influence or perception of potential influence on the CRTC, because again, the way our reading of the bill as crafted is that it would require them to go do this consultation before even exercising a single power. So even before they get to the point of saying, we're going to do a public proceeding, they would have to do this consultation. And so again, it just creates that risk of influence on their decision making.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gainey. We'll go to Mr. Gaudin. Welcome to the committee.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair.
Monsieur Ripley.
Mr. Ripley, I think that the bill that's before us on the cultural distinctiveness of Quebec and Francophonie outside of Quebec is very important. I believe there is a contradiction between the independence of media outlets and the rights of Francophones, and I think as a country we are under the obligation of hearing the voices of people who speak our both official languages. So I think it's a very relevant bill. Now, the way I understand things is that what you mentioned, and you referred to the provinces and Quebec, which is, of course, a province among the provinces of Canada, could be consulted, but the bill says the CRTC consults or shall consult. So can you confirm to me that the bill introduces an obligation on the CRTC to consult with Quebec and Francophones outside of Quebec? Chair, thank you for the question. MP Gaudin. Yes, indeed. a reading of the bill would suggest that this creates an obligation on the CRTC to consult Quebec and the other provinces on issues that impact Francophone communities in these provinces or territories. The current situation is such that, or rather the way it functions at the moment, places CRTC in a public consultation process, and they would publish a notice of public consultation, and it's open to everyone. Everyone can come and participate, including the provinces and the territories. So the decision to participate or not belongs to the provinces, to Quebec, for instance. So they will be deciding whether they want to participate in the process. But there is no positive obligation on the CRTC's part to go knocking on the doors of the provinces or Quebec. So you mentioned in one of your answers that consultation would be dangerous because you are giving the illusion of power to organizations such as provincial governments. But I think it's their responsibility. And if we want to keep our country bilingual with French and English, we need to have the tools to do that, because currently French is declining. We have to recognize that, and it's urgent that we took action. You also said that it's a burden in terms of the operations of the CRTC. In what sense is this procedure not legitimate, and it's not worth carrying the burden, as you put it, to make sure that we are hitting our objective? Chair, if you allow me. Thank you for the question. At the outset, I would like to indicate that the government also believes that it's important for Canadians, the provinces and the territories, that they be consulted in the decisions of the CRTC. So it's not a question of consulting or not consulting. It's a question more on how this consultation is structured. A challenge with this bill, as I mentioned, because it modifies the CRTC Act, it says essentially that before the CRTC uses any of its authorities, it has to consult Quebec and other provinces and territories. It's not that a consultation is perceived as potentially having an influence, but it's rather the fact that even before making a decision on any issue in a public manner, the CRTC will have to go and consult with the provinces. So it introduces a risk in the sense that maybe the CRTC will change its point of view before the public consultation process. That is the way in which the consultation is structured. That's what creates this perception. And the government also, of course, fully supports the idea of supporting Francophone markets in line with the Radio, Television and Telecommunications Act. And there were many initiatives with C11, notably to strengthen these measures. Also within the Broadcasting Act, there are obligations of consultation with regard to official language minority communities. So it's not doing this work, but it's just about making sure that it's done in a manner that preserves the CRTC's independence. Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to also thank you for answering my questions in French, and you have a very good French.
Thank you, Mr. Gaudin. We move to Mr.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Juste quelques observations.
Thank you, Chair. I will have a couple of observations on some of the comments. For instance, it was mentioned that the minister wrote to all premiers or all provinces and to Quebec to have their comments and to invite them to this process. Yes, there was a call, as is the case every single time, to invite stakeholders, all of the groups and organizations that would be impacted by the potential legislative change. But that is not what Quebec is asking for. What Quebec is asking for is when it is a question of French culture or French language or Francophone media outlets, and when it's something that might have an impact on Quebec's cultural distinctiveness, that Quebec be consulted, but not in this ocean of stakeholders. Yes, we're interested, we will put our hands up and we will put our names in the hat and we will wait for our turn. No. The Quebec has been recognized by the Chamber, the House of Commons, rather, to be treated separately and as a separate nation. And of course, the French language and the protection of the French language are key components of that. And so it's completely legitimate for Quebec to have this demand. So the minister sent out a letter, and we were aware of that within as part of the discussions on C11, but there was no answer to this letter. C354 is the beginning of an answer to this request by Quebec. So I think there are two ways of looking at this, but the right way of looking at this is, what is Quebec? Quebec is a nation and recognized as such by the House of Commons. So what Quebec is asking for is to be taken into account in these specific subjects as a government that has responsibilities in these matters. I don't see this as a threat at all. It not a menace for the functioning of the CRTC. It's a simple procedure to introduce, so it's not going to be heavy or a burden. It's just the Commission consults the government of Quebec. And when you look at the amendment proposal by the Conservatives, it introduces a much wider process. So the request here is very simple, but we're making it more complicated. We're making heavier. But this is just about answering a request by Quebec, who is simply asking to protect the French language, the French culture, and the media outlets that are significant stakeholders in all of this. So we've referred to elements that would make what's before us a bit more complex and a bit heavier, but I think it's really straightforward and easy to introduce because we're talking about consultations that have to do with the jurisdiction of the government of Quebec. So we're beating around the bush a little bit, but I just wanted to add this comment, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Dillon, I do not see a headset. So that's problematic, number one, because you will not be able to speak. But if we do ever get to the sub-amendment vote, we ask you to go up or down with your vote, if you don't mind. Mr. Noor Mohammed, I see your hand, followed by Ms. Ashton and Ms. Latenzio. Just to let you know that all three of you have been identified here. Mr. Noor Mohammed, you're first.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'ai une question pour.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Mr. Ripley. Mr. Ripley, I agree with Mr. Godin on the fact that the CRTC consults with the Francophone communities across the country, including in Quebec. But I don't understand why this bill would improve or strengthen these consultations or would make these consultations more important. So do we need to adopt this legislation to make sure that the CRTC will consult with these important stakeholders and so that the voices of the Francophone communities are heard? Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. As I mentioned, no, at the moment there is no impediment in terms of Quebec or other provinces being able to participate in these public consultation procedures initiated by the CRTC. The difference would be, as I mentioned in my answer to MP Godin, that it would introduce an obligation on the CRTC to consult with the provinces and territories before exercising any of its powers. That would be the structural difference as seen by the department. As we speak, the CRTC goes, okay, we're going to make such a decision, or we're going to hold rather a public consultation on such a decision, and then they publish a motion of public consultation, and then the decision of the CRTC will have to be based on the opinions coming forth from that consultation. But with Bill C-354, what changes is that even before thinking about potentially making a decision and exercising its powers, the CRTC will have to go and consult with the government of Quebec and other provinces and territories on these questions. So that would be the structural issue at hand. Thank you, Mr. Ripley. Mr. Godin referred to the CRTC's independence. But are we really dictating what the CRTC needs to do? Are there any risks when we proceed in this manner? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. Yes, we do see some risks. As I mentioned, currently the way for a government to engage with the CRTC is very formal and very structured, and there are transparency measures around these processes. That is to avoid any perception of the government of the day putting pressure on the CRTC to make certain decisions given the importance of its independence, or rather the independence of medias, the journalistic independence of different media outlets. So here, with this potential change, even before exercising any authority or power as part of the Broadcasting Act, the CRTC would have to take an initial step and consult, so that we do see some risks with that.
There's no real. I'm struggling with this because I am trying to find a way to make sure that Monsieur Champoux feels confident that what is in place currently will work. I mean, you've now told us that we don't really need this bill to do the thing that the bill is trying to do. And we also see tremendous risk in terms of potential influence on the CRTC if this is passed. In a nutshell, I guess, as you look at as you look at the pros and you've looked at the cons and the challenges here objectively, what's the one thing you think we are missing in this conversation? Because what I am worried about is working on the back of assumptions. One way that you've given us every assurance that the CRTC, this is already what the CRTC is and should be doing, and there's nothing that this bill does to improve on that. But we are hearing considerable risk in respect of the independence of the CRTC. What are some of the unintended consequences that we might be missing if this does get passed?
Mr. Chair, so thank you for the question, and I've had the opportunity to listen to the debate as well. Just to take a step back, I would go back to, it's important to remember that the Broadcasting Act is a policy framework, right? And we've spent a lot of time debating over the last several years that policy framework, and there were many amendments made to that policy framework in terms of what the Broadcasting Act is supposed to do and what it's supposed to accomplish. And then that is given over the CRTC to give effect to that. And in that context, well, I have certainly a lot of respect for the position of different governments on a decision that the CRTC is going to take. Their view is important. The considerations they put forward are important, but they do need to be balanced against the considerations and views put forward by other stakeholders, including official language minority communities who may live in that province. And so again, the risk comes back to, would this bill be seen to be elevating Quebec and other provinces above some of those other perspectives and views that need to be considered in the context of a CRTC decision? And that's not to take anything away from the views and positions of those governments, not at all. But again, the system as constructed is one where the CRTC is supposed to be independent from the federal government as well as provincial and territorial levels of government. And so, again, elevating them in that way creates that risk.
That's actually very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Ripley.
Thank you, Mr. Noor Mohammed. We're getting some clarification. Ms. Ashton?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I am a bit concerned what we've sort of seen unfold during this meeting. I think we were all very clear. This bill is just one clause. There's obviously 2 amendments, now a sub-amendment. And I think we all hope that it would move a lot quicker, especially since we've already heard from witnesses and had an opportunity to ask questions of clarification. You know, I think a number of questions have already been asked now of the officials. And certainly, you know, I think what certainly stays with me is that this is a reinforcement, perhaps, of a direction that the CRTC believes is important, which is consultation, and I think a particularly important piece, Mr. Ripley alluded to it, is respecting minority language communities. Et c'est pour cette raison que notre amendement, le deuxième amendement auquel on n'a pas réussi à se rendre, parle de la priorité.
That is why our amendment is about the priority that we have to give to Quebec's cultural distinctiveness and the cultural distinctiveness of other Francophone minority communities in Canada. So the consultations should take that into account. This amendment reflects the position of the FCFA, which is the national organization of the Francophonie in Quebec and in Canada. We heard from multiple witnesses that such an amendment will help make this bill stronger, and I think it's important as a tool in our efforts to prevent and revert the decline of the French language, which is a very significant problem. French is in decline, and we know that the media, the communication landscape, these are very important tools. And the CRTC plays a very important role in all of this, and they have to make sure that consultations are carried out with language minority communities across Canada.
Reason, you know, this important point certainly championed as well by minority language communities, particularly Francophone communities outside of Quebec. I'm puzzled as to why we're wasting so much time going around this bill. I mean, I think you know, folks have expressed concern from all sides. There's support from others as well. I think we've exhausted sort of the range of questions on a amendment or on a bill that is extremely brief, and I would certainly like to move to a vote on this. And I would ask the chair to direct our committee to move on this bill so we can get through it and move to other important business.
Thank you, Ms. Ashton. We still have speakers lined up to speak to this bill, so until we hear everybody on the debate, we cannot go to a vote. I will say this, just as a chair here today, it's a little bit different when we have dealt with this bill 4 months ago, summer, and then we've had new committee members around the table. So I mean, there's an education process on this bill, I think, because it's, you know, we had it months ago, then we adjourned for the summer, now we're back, and now we've got 2 or 3 new committee members just catching up. So I'm not defending this, I'm just kind of stating the obvious, that people around the table and others wanted a better grasp of 354 with the recent amendment of Mr. Champoux. So saying that, Ms. Latenzio, your hand is up and you're welcome to speak.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, je vais diriger mes questions.
Thank you, Chair. My questions will be for Mr. Ripley. The bill that's before us would oblige the CRTC to carry out significant additional consultations when it comes to a good number of its decisions. So do you not think that this would increase the administrative burden on the CRTC in terms of time and resources? And could it potentially harm its capacity to fulfill its mandate? Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So, yes, it could definitely increase the burden on the CRTC, because when you read the bill, the text of the bill, it says that this consultation needs to take place before exercising the powers under paragraph 1, and that refers to the Broadcasting Act. So the CRTC takes many decisions on a day-to-day basis, administrative decisions and others, and some political decisions are also made, but the way in which we understand the objective of this bill is that each time the Commission wants to exercise one of the powers outlined by the legislation, the Broadcasting Act notably, they have to consult, and it is clear that this will increase the burden on the CRTC. So this bill, can it also lead to additional expenditure, significant expenditure potentially, because more staff would need to be hired? Thank you for the follow-up question. Yes. Every time the CRTC launches a consultation or any other public process, that comes with a cost, and that comes with a certain time investment that is added to the decision-making process. So there would be this obligation of consulting before making decisions, and then if the CRTC decides to launch a public consultation procedure, that will be an additional procedure that remains open to the provinces and territories to participate in that public consultation process too. So it does add to the procedure in terms of the cost, but also in terms of the time it takes. So, Mr. Ripley, to go back on the question around the CRTC's independence, you said that this bill could create the impression of undue influence and potentially impact the CRTC's independence. So could you speak more to that question of independence and why it is important that such a perception of influence not be present, or why it could be harmful? Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. As I mentioned, the CRTC's role is to implement the political framework that is stipulated by the Broadcasting Act, and that touches upon programming in the French language and other matters. So the CRTC's role is to pick the best manner in which they can support these political goals, and it's clear that a province like Quebec would have an interest or an opinion on such circumstances, but we have to also recognize that there are other stakeholders that would have other perspectives and other positions on these questions. So it's not a question of not taking into account the positions of provincial governments, but the CRTC's role is also to take everything into account, and at the end of this all, to make a decision and to make sure that the CRTC's opinion reflects the political framework of the legislation in a better manner. So adding this consultation duty with regard to the provincial governments would create a risk in the sense that the CRTC might change its point of view even before consulting with other stakeholders and hearing other points of view and hearing from other people who could have opposing points of view, for instance, to those of the provincial governments. One final question on these consultations. How long could it take, in your opinion, Mr. Ripley, to carry out such a consultation process? Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I think my answer would be it depends in terms of the timeline, but the issue with the proposal is that the consultation duty seems to be pretty vast for every single time the CRTC wants to exercise its powers. So it's not or rather it's more the issue here is more that it would be a repetitive consultation obligation, because when you read the text of the legislation, you see that it's quite comprehensive. Thank you.
Any more discussion on Mr. Champoux' sub-amendment? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. Go ahead.
Mr. Nur Mohammed.
No.
Mr. Coteau. No. Ms. Dillon.
No.
Madam Gainey.
No.
Madame Latanzio.
No.
Mr. Gould.
Wait.
Mr. Giovanni.
Yes.
Mr. Soroka.
Yes.
Mr. Champoux.
Oui.
Ms. Ashton.
No.
Four yeas, 6 nays.
Just hold on.
I think I made an error. I made an error there myself. I'm sorry for that. That is
3, 4.
no. I'm sorry. I made an error with that one. Can I just confirm? Is always correct? Mr. Coteau, can I get your vote again?
I voted with the team, so against the amendment.
Perfect. So yes, it's 4 yeas, 6 nays.
Okay, thank you. The sub-amendment then. Mr. Coteau?
Did you say 4 nays?
4 yeas.
4 yeas. Got it. Okay.
6 nays, 4 yeas. The sub-amendment is defeated. Any more discussion on the original amendment? Seeing none? Mr. Noor Mohammed, under the gun. You just beat me. Go ahead.
Can you just read back for us quickly the amendment as it now stands, or the amendment as it is?
I can.
So it's CPC 1.
Yes, we're at CPC 1, as you know.
And there's no changes. So
There's no changes, so it would be.
that's what he has in his package.
It's what you got in your package that was sent out by the legislative.
No. Okay, I'm good.
Are you good then?
The same one, sorry.
Okay.
I just didn't have it in front of me. The
Yeah.
screen died. So I just
Okay.
wanted to make sure I had it.
No, that's fine. So we're going to have a vote on the amendment of CPC 1. Call the vote. Yep. Oh,
This is the one from Ms. Thomas, the original
well,
mover?
it was original mover,
Yeah. but
but now it's, Ms. Thomas, as you know, is no longer, so it was put up by CPC 1. That's
Okay.
right.
So this, just for technical reasons, does the name get attached to this as the mover, or
No.
does it stay the same as is? Or it's just the CPC, yeah?
Mr. Giovanni.
Okay.
Okay. Good question, though. Thank you. So again, I'm going to call for the vote on the amendment of CPC 1.
And the vote is on CPC 1. Mr. Noor Mohammed?
No.
Mr. Koto?
No.
Madame Dillon?
No.
Madame Gainey?
No.
Madame Latanzio?
No.
Mr. Gould?
Wait.
Mr. Giovanni?
We.
Mr. Soroka?
Yes.
Mr. Shampoo?
Non.
Miss Ashton?
No.
That's 3 yeas, 7 nays.
So does not carry. We move now to the NDP 1. We'll ask Ms. Ashton if you would like to move it, please.
Yes, I would like to move it. I think I explained in my earlier remarks why this amendment is so important. It has been championed by the FCFA and leaders of the minority language community. And in the interest of time and passing this bill, I will leave my remarks to that, and obviously hope we can all support this critical amendment to minority language communities, to Francophone communities across Canada.
Mr. Shampoo and then Mr. Koto.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimais.
Thank you, Chair. I really hope that the amendment proposed by my colleague, Ms. Ashton, reflects indeed the expectations of communities, Francophone communities outside of Quebec, that these communities were consulted a number of months ago, and this does reflect their expectations, and it also reflects the expectation of Quebec of being consulted as indicated in the bill, in the text of the bill C-354. I hope that we won't have lengthy discussions on this. We have already asked and answered all of the questions with the help of the officials. I do hope that we can go to the vote very quickly on this amendment by Ms. Ashton.
Thank you. We'll move to Mr. Koto.
I just have a quick question for Mr. Ripley. When the bill refers to markets, like, are we specifically talking about television and radio in this reference from your perspective? The term as outlined in the original legislation, when it refers to markets, is it just television and radio?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair, if I may. So the context of the Broadcasting Act is radio, television, online streaming. My read of the term market, though, is more about, again, a language market as opposed to kind of a reference to radio or television market, right? So those places in Canada where there is a French-speaking community, a French-speaking market. So again, we can think of Franco-Ontarians, we can think of Franco-Manitobans, etc. That would be my reading of that term.
And just because it, when I think of market, I do think of like CRTC, television, radio, but the term will not, like, it's pretty clear if this passes that what it's making reference to from your perspective.
Chair, thank you for the question. It's not, to my knowledge, a term that is used elsewhere in the Broadcasting Act, so there is a certain degree of novelty or newness about it, and so it does introduce a degree of ambiguity. It's not a defined term that you find in the Broadcasting Act.
And Mr. Chair, a quick question to the mover. The consultations that took place, how were these consultations done specifically? Maybe the mover would like to just give us a bit of a reference point on that, if possible.
Ms. Ashton, you're with us as Mr. Koto has asked you a question.
Sure. I've repeated numerous times that the Fédération Canadienne des Communautés Francophones is a main champion of this amendment. And I mean, this is the national body for Francophone communities outside of Quebec. I hope we can respect them. And I'm frankly a bit shocked, the Liberals who claim to want to take the decline of French seriously. I don't know why we're wasting time on this critical amendment that's being championed by Francophone communities outside. If we want to see support for Francophone communities, the Liberals would get behind this amendment. Looking forward to a vote ASAP.
Mr. Cotto, anything else to add?
I've just the assumption that one wouldn't care about French markets outside of in Ontario and across the country. I think there's lots of evidence out there that Liberals have supported French communities and specific rights right across the country. So I don't think by asking questions on a definition of what market's referring to or what type of consultation's done is in any way trying to take away from the respect for Francophone languages across the country as a whole. So it's a question I think as a member we all have the right to ask questions for clarity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We go to Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would also was going to begin by echoing a little bit what Mr. Cotto said. I mean, when we're asking questions about an amendment that is quite frankly important, given that we're talking about the actual mandate and what the CRTC does, that should not be construed as lack of support. As Mr. Champoux knows, we spent a lot of time together in my riding this summer, visiting, talking to Francophone communities, and the support that I and others of a lot of political parties are giving to ensuring that Francophone communities are heard. I guess the question that I would ask, I don't know that that's really in the spirit of trying to get to a good place on this amendment. I guess the question I would ask to Mr. Ripley, very sharp, very specific, not trying to delay, is we've heard about the CRTC's consultation process from the CRTC. We're talking about making sure that linguistic minority communities, Francophone linguistic minorities like the ones in my riding, are actually heard and that these markets are reflected. We're using terminology that is now outside what is normally used. So I want to know how this specific amendment is going to improve or enhance or assert any improvement to the consultations, the detailed consultation that CRTC already does, and if the organizations implicated are not feeling like they're being heard, is this the right way to go about it? Because I do want to make sure that organizations that reflect the aspirations of the Francophone community across the country are actually heard. But is this the best way to do it? I guess is what I'd like to know.
Chair, if I may, so two things, MP Noor Mohammed. The first is obviously Mr. Ashton is best placed to speak to the objective of the proposed amendment, but from where I sit, it seems to be ensuring that there is a broader range of perspectives brought to the table in terms of this obligation to consult, and that it wouldn't just be provinces and territories, but also official language minority communities, again, who may have a different perspective than the provincial government that they wish to be considered. The second thing, and in relation to your question, is there was a lot of debate about this in the context of the Online Streaming Act, Bill C-11, and Parliament ultimately did put in an obligation on the CRTC to proactively consult with official language minority communities when making decisions that could adversely affect them. And so you see that at Article 5.2 of the Broadcasting Act, where there's a positive obligation, and there's a positive obligation on the CRTC to share information with them, to consult them before decisions are made, to support their participation in the consultations, and then at the end of the process, provide them even with feedback after a decision has been made. And so the Broadcasting Act was already significantly strengthened to ensure the participation of official language minority communities during public proceedings and consultations by the CRTC.
Other questions, Mr. Noor Mohammed?
I had one more. If we were to make this amendment, what does that do positively or negatively for potentially Indigenous communities, other communities that may or may not currently feel like they're being...
Monsieur le Président, j'ai un rappel au règlement là-dessus.
Mr. Chair, I have a point of order on that. If my Liberal colleagues want to stretch it out until the end to avoid us from voting, they can say that. But Indigenous communities, and this question has nothing to do with what's before us, the amendment or whatever is already exists at the moment. I think whatever is in place for Indigenous communities is very clear in terms of the consultation. But here we're looking at an amendment to a bill, so we could really cut to the chase and remain stick to the issue.
Late, about 6 minutes late. We've asked for an extension to 106. So, Mr. Noor Mohammed, if you can wrap up your question to Mr. Ripley, if you don't mind.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je suis toujours avec.
Thank you, Chair. I do not agree with my friend for whom I have a lot of respect, and I mean Mr. Shampoo, because we already have the capacity and the obligation for the CRTC to carry out consultations with Francophone communities outside the province of Quebec. What bothers me here is that if we go ahead with this change, would it trigger other requests for other changes from Indigenous communities, as an example? Is this something we have considered in this situation? Are we opening the door to other requests?
C'est pas une question. C'est pas une question.
And it's not a question to say that, no, we shouldn't be doing these consultations. It's really just about understanding whether there are risks that we have not taken into account.
Thank you for the question, MP Noor Mohammed. So effectively, if the committee supports Bill C-354, it is creating a new consultation mechanism that is giving privileged access to those listed in whatever the bill reads. And again, from giving that privileged access to provincial and territorial governments, we've talked about the potential of a perception of influence. Broadening it to include others obviously does raise the question about, you know, who has access to that mechanism and versus who doesn't, and that's why the government's view remains that the best one is a public consultation open to everybody to participate, where everybody's views are put on the public record, and the CRTC makes a decision based on that public record, including the views and perspectives put forward by provincial governments.
Mr. Noor Mohammed, any other further discussion?
Sorry, I was on mute. So just to the last thing that Mr. Ripley said, the way that you've just phrased this would imply that happens. I mean, the bill seems to imply that it doesn't. And where is the disconnect?
Chair, I think again, Monsieur Shampoo outlined some of the concerns that have been voiced by the government of Quebec. That said, nothing prevents the government of Quebec from participating in the consultations of the CRTC. Monsieur Shampoo has made the case for why he believes that there should be a positive obligation, but again, from the government's perspective, it does introduce certain risks, and so perhaps it is not a question of a positive obligation, but ensuring again that all participants, including provincial and territorial governments, know when a consultation is underway, and that they are welcome and encouraged to participate if they have views that they would like the CRTC to take into account.
Okay, Mr. Noor Mohammed, you're good. Ms. Gainey, before we get to you, is it the wish, because we're at 105, 106, wish of the committee to extend to talk about this on Wednesday when we meet? We're close, but I can see Ms. Gainey would like another round here of questioning. So what is the will of the committee, as we are getting close to the time here for...
It is 106 now.
Yep.
I think we have to end, and we'll just.
So would you like to come back to this on Wednesday? Yep, Mr.
What's on the agenda next for Wednesday, Mr. Chair?
Okay, Wednesday, Mr.
Non, Monsieur Nour
Champeau?
Mohamed a demandé quelle était.
Mr. Noor Mohammed just asked what's on the agenda for the Wednesday meeting.
I'm not sure. There's two things. We can continue this on Wednesday, and then we can go to the drafted report. Mr. Champeau?
Monsieur le Président, je vais d'abord exprimer
Mr. Chair, I'd like to first express my deep disappointment rather, that we have not been able to take care of a bill that only contains one clause in 2 hours of committee. So I think that it's been quite a disappointment, and I have to say that publicly. This is a request by Quebec, and if you have the least amount of respect for Quebec, you have to do the work, and we shouldn't really have wasted so much time with that. I think we have to come back to this issue on Wednesday immediately and be done with Bill C-354. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Ripley and Mr. Lorraine, could you come back Wednesday? Yeah, thank you. Seeing no more conversation, Ms. Gainey, we'll get back to you Wednesday. You'll be first up. Could I have someone adjourn? Okay, thank you,
I can move to
Mr.
adjourn.
Chauvin. Thank you.
Thank you.